Oh, so now we care about physics. The Newton's laws of motion and actions and equal and opposite reactions. Really? Hello, my wonderful viewers, and welcome to another episode of Betty Adams Overanalyzes. Today we are going to take a look at Season 1, Episode 3 of Star Wars Skeleton Crew. As usual, there will be a short spoiler-free section, and then we'll get into all the juicy spoilers. This lesson opened with reasonably realistic physics. A shocker, I know. Most sci-fi, much sci-fi at least, plays fast and loose with the laws of physics. But this show decided to open with that. And it was very, very impactful. One of my strongest memories from this episode is just cringing as the natural consequences of actions tore across the screen. And this whole show, it's just been a love letters to the 80s and early 90s. But there was one particular scene in this episode that seemed to be inspired by something from much more recent than that, while the overall feel of the episode definitely came from one particular 80s made-for-TV movie. Again, I thoroughly enjoyed watching this episode. It made me happy. Full suggestions for everybody to watch it. I was mildly surprised. It wasn't exactly a plot twist, but it was something that I wasn't expecting showed up. And I was struck again by either how good these child actors are or how well the director knows how to use these child actors. And just again, how well the director layers and stitches together these incredibly dark, creepy undertones about what's going on in this universe with just pure action adventure that any kid would love. Now, there's a lot of stuff in this episode, so I want to jump into the spoilers. I'm going to switch over now, so you have been warned. If you don't want any spoilers, you can take this time to click away. Check out the links below the video for a copy of my book, Hidden Fires, Dragons, Aliens, and Things That Go Boom in the Night. Alright, so we start off this episode with our intrepid heroes escaping from the brig. And they, with running back and forth, managed to make it out to their ship without too much trouble. This is because, and interestingly enough, we still don't know whether Jod, this sketchy guy they're meeting and linked up their fates with, actually can use the Force or not. Clearly, he's not one of the main Jedi. The age is wrong, the time is wrong, and in this episode, they outright said what I said in my last review. He could have used magnets to move the key. Or, a string, a very thin string. So they address that on screen, but he does seem to have the ability to sense life forms, which could be sharp hearing, could be that he knows the patterns of this base, could be that he knows the guard rotations. So we're not sure whether or not this guy actually has Jedi powers, but he knows how to mimic them at least. And he seemed to know that these kids would respond to that, in general, very positively. However, we see that he is unable to predict the presence of droids, which as a threat, most Jedi should be able to predict the approach of a droid, even though it's not technically a living life form. We saw that plenty of times during the Clone Wars. So that's very telling. He can't predict oncoming danger, but he does seem to have the ability to detect life forms, or he just knows the patterns of that particular base. So this show is really good at leaving us guessing. And in the process of showing us that what Jod's abilities are and aren't, or Crimson Jack as we're calling him by the end of the episode, we also get a look at what is potentially one of the darker underbelly aspects of At-Atan. KB, this sweet little girl who has multiple cybernetic enhancements to her brain. We find out she has a life monitor. We find out she is able to detect approaching drones through their electromagnetic waves. We find out that she's very good at calculating odds, that her ability to do math is off the charts. That she can interface with unknown ship systems. We found that out in episode 1. And this is all cool from her abilities perspective, but this means that her parents chose to take a child long before she was of the age of consent and heavily modify her body with this incredibly invasive technology. And this show does kind of lean on how much of a modified cyborg KB is, which, in the light of how nervous Fern's mom was about Fern being at the top of her class, which is again referenced, and how stressed Wim's dad was about Wim taking that test and passing that test, if these, what are shown to be loving parents, are willing to screw entire computers into their daughter's brain right at the beginning of her life, as she's going on this career-deciding test, it makes you wonder, what was the alternative? What would have happened to KB if she didn't have these augmentations? But anyway, they escape, they get to the ship, and the ship is still attached with all of its tethers. Now, I have worked around boats all my life. Even a small boat pulling on its rope exerts a large amount of force. A big boat with a cable tether, or a truck with cable tethers, there's one thing you learn about tie-downs, strap-downs, and lines that secure ships. They are putting a huge amount of stress on that. And you're told if that thing snaps and it hits you, you're dead. It could take out an eye, it could take off your head, depending on how big the rope is. And in the escape that they show on the screen as the kids are escaping in their ship, that when that tether breaks, it doesn't just float off into space, it snaps back and wreaks havoc on the space station that they just left. And it was so well done and so viscerally presented, and you could see the tension building up. And it was just very well done, and it made me literally give a spasmodic cringe, because I have been in situations where ships of that size were pulling on lines of that size, and you could hear them creaking, and you are just very acutely aware that if that thing snaps and hits you, you're dead. And that escape attempt really illustrated what the physics of that situation were really like. I'm like, okay, so now we care about physics in this situation where it can be cinematic and terrifying. Okay, fair enough. And then they head out into space. And the main quest for this adventure is basically finding a map back to Atan. Jod obviously has his reasons, and the kids are shown as being smart enough to challenge him. Fern and KB at least, as well as their droid SM-33, Smee. So Smee, and there's this funny scene where Smee is clearly incredibly suspicious of Jod. He's not one of the crew, and Smee clearly has experience with this type of pirate, because Jod turns out to be Crimson Jack the pirate. Spoilers for the end of the episode. Because Smee has apparently, as far as we know, bonded on Fern as his captain, he's very protective of the current crew. So Smee walks up and tries to challenge Jod, but Smee, in his current damaged state isn't quite tall enough to loom over Jod, so he heaves himself up to his full size and looms over Jod, glaring down at him. And there's this tense moment where the human and the robot are in the ship, in the dull red lighting, in this sort of challenging position. And the challenger eventually has to back off because the challengee is just standing there calm. And this is a fairly logical sequence of events. And it was, the way it was shot framed and shown, it was very, very similar to the scene in Netflix's 2008 Lost in Space, where John Robinson gets in Robot's face while they're dehumidifying the Jupiter early in the season. And doesn't necessarily challenge him, but is trying to figure him out. And eventually John has to leave because the robot's just standing there impassively. Only the situation's been reversed. In this case, it's the robot who's the denizen of the ship, trying to protect his cohort, and the human who just stands there smiling quietly. And I might remind you that the actor who played John Robinson also played a pirate in Black Sails. So the connection isn't just how those scenes were shot. It was a very interesting introversion of the 2018 Lost in Space scene. Not introversion, inversion of the 2018 Lost in Space scene. But then again, we get to the main quest. They need to find a way back to At-Atan. And they do this by Jod, or Crimson Jack, communicating with one of his old contacts. So he takes the kids in the ship to this moon to meet this contact. And the kids are generally going along with this because, again, they want to get home, and no one knows where their home is as far as they can tell. But Jod doesn't seem to want to call ahead and let this person know he's coming. Then we flash over to the contact, and you get an older female voice talking to another voice describing what she's seeing on her screens, which is this guy and the 4 children approaching. And I thought, and that just triggered a bell in my head. I'd seen that scene before, and I realized that was the framing device for the 1988 made-for-TV movie On Our Own, a story about 4 children who are trying to hunt down after their mother dies. They're left orphans. The foster system is going to split them up, and they steal a car and go on a cross-country adventure to find this uncle that they haven't seen in years. And it wasn't just that framing device, the older female voice doing things in the background while narrating what's happening. There were a lot of visual callbacks to that film, it's a 1988 made-for-TV film. I don't think they're deliberately planting Easter eggs in here, but that was definitely part of their inspiration for this episode. And it really does just show how good this show is at presenting nostalgia without overdosing on member berries. The main thing is, one of the main advertisements, one of the main posters for On Our Own, was the 4 kids traveling while silhouetted against the sky. And we have this very prolonged scene where we have the 4 kids following after Jod while silhouetted against the sky. So, Lost in Space 2018 and On Our Own 1988, this show draws from a lot of different inspirations, and yet somehow ends up making each episode its own thing. There was one thing that really did surprise me. After the last episode, I was reasonably sure that Wim's dad was going to get disappeared. He went up to the security robots, and they acted kind of suspiciously when he told them what was going on. But when we see him, he's with a group of all the parents whose children are missing. They're discussing what's going on. We learn a few interesting things, like even Fern's mom does not actually have direct access to the head of the government. It sounds like nobody has direct access to the head of the government, raising the Wizard of Oz question, does the head of the government even exist? Or exist in the form that they think it does? But they're all there. And the robots go out, the robots do their search, they determine that the kids have left the planet, and the parents ask, well, are you going to contact the Republic for help? And the robots just start going into these pre-programmed automated answers, and the parents are just getting frustrated, but Fern's mom says, look, just calm down, I'll petition for an audience with the head of the government immediately. And then that scene closes. And now these robots are clearly not as nefarious as I thought they were last episode. And we're still kind of stuck between, is this planet stuck where it is due to malfeasance? Or is this planet stuck where it is in its culture, in its time, due to a system that just kept on running after some important cog was removed? We don't know yet. We'll find out as we go along. Again, I really enjoyed this episode. Strongly recommend it. But if you've seen it, what did you think? Is the government of At-Atan deliberately keeping the people in the dark, or is the government of At-Atan a machine whose central intelligence just collapsed a long time ago, and it's just kept working on an automated system? Tell me what you think in the comments below. Hit that like and subscribe, and peace out, my wonderful viewers. Step into a world of science and of story, of laughter and of tears. Betty Adams has crafted entire worlds of science fiction and science fantasy adventure in her Humans Are Weird series and in her Dying Embers series. Be prepared to laugh, cry, and become absorbed. Check out her books at the links below the video.